I moved back to Halvers in the March, after my mother's second surgery. I want to say that first, because I think it matters. I wasn't there for atmosphere. I wasn't looking for a story. I was there because someone had to drive her to the clinic in Alden twice a week, and my brother has kids, and I don't. That's the whole reason. I'd left when I was 19, and I came back at 34, and the town had done the thing small towns do, where it looks identical and feels completely different, like a room you remember being bigger. The house is at the end of Coley Road, which is the last road before the fields start. When I was a kid, there were 4 other families out that way. Now it's us and the Peterson place, which is empty, and past that, just the grain co-op that only runs a few months a year. So it's quiet. I don't want to make it sound sinister. It was actually nice for the first couple of weeks. I'd forgotten how dark it gets when there's nothing around to make light. The fog thing I heard about, the way you hear about everything there, which is from someone at the gas station not really telling you, just assuming you already know. I was buying coffee, and the woman at the register, I think her name was Denise, she'd been a few years ahead of me. She looked out the window at the fields and said, "Gonna be a low one tonight." And I said something like, "What?" And she said, "Fog." And then she said, and I remember this because of how casual it was, "You're out on Coley, so just keep your curtains shut." And she gave me my change. I didn't ask. That's the part I go back to. I didn't ask, because asking would have made me the person who didn't know, and I was already the person who left and came back, and I didn't want to be that on top of it. So I just nodded, like keeping your curtains shut in the fog was a normal thing everyone did. My mother knew more, but she's not a talker about that kind of thing. When I brought it up, she was doing the crossword, and she said the fog comes off the low ground by the co-op when the temperature drops fast, which is true, it does. That's just weather. And then she said, without looking up, "We don't go out in it, that's all. Never have. We." Like it was a rule that predated me. And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Because you can't see," which is the kind of answer that's completely reasonable and also tells you nothing. The first one came, maybe 10 days after that. I noticed it because the yard light, we have one of those pole lights on a sensor by the driveway. It came on early, while there was still grey in the sky, because the fog had cut the light enough to trip the sensor. I went to the window, and the driveway was just gone. Not dim, gone. I could see the porch rail, and then a wall of it, and the pole light was this smeared orange smudge, maybe 30 feet out, that didn't illuminate anything. It just hung there. I'll be honest, my first reaction was that it was beautiful. I stood at the window a while. My mother was already in bed, and I remember I had the thought, this is what Denise meant, and I felt a little dumb for how ordinary it was. It's fog. People are precious about their local weather everywhere. I kept the curtains open. I want to be clear that nothing happened that night. I sat in the front room with the lamp on and read, and once or twice I looked up at the window and saw the lamp and the room reflected back at me in the black glass, which is normal. That's just what glass does at night. But I noticed I'd started angling myself, so I wasn't sitting with my back to it. I didn't decide to do that. I just noticed at some point that I had. Around midnight I heard the gravel. We have a gravel drive, and gravel makes a specific sound, and it's a sound you learn without trying to. Not a car. A car has weight. It crunches deep. This was lighter. 2, 3 steps worth. Up near where the drive meets the road, and then nothing. And I told myself, deer. We get deer constantly. They come out of the co-op fields, and deer on gravel sounds exactly like that. That light picking sound. I actually said it out loud, quietly. Deer, which is a thing I've started to do. Narrate to myself. I don't know when that started, but I closed the curtains, and I remember standing there with my hand on the fabric feeling slightly ashamed, like I was giving in to a superstition and doing it anyway. Nothing else happened. That's important. I woke up. The fog was gone. There was frost. It was a completely normal morning, and I felt stupid about the curtains. My mother asked if I'd slept all right, and I said fine. The second one was maybe 2 weeks later, and I almost didn't clock it as the same thing because it rolled in during the afternoon, which the man at the co-op later told me is unusual, but not unheard of when the ground's been wet. My mother was at the clinic. I'd dropped her. My brother was picking her up that day, so I was alone in the house, and it went from a flat grey afternoon to that same white nothing in about 40 minutes. And this time, because it was daylight, I could see more of how it behaved. And this is the first thing I genuinely couldn't explain to myself. The fog didn't come from the co-op side. My mother had always said it comes off the low ground, and the low ground is to the west, toward the co-op. But I was standing at the kitchen window, which faces east, toward the Peterson place and the road, and it came from there, from the empty side. I watched it come up the road. I don't know how else to say it. It moved up Coley Road like it was following the road, and then it filled in the fields after. That's backwards. I stood there trying to make it make sense. Wind, I thought. The wind must be from the east today. But there wasn't any wind. That's the thing about fog. It sits in still air, and this was sitting. It wasn't being pushed. I closed the curtains before dark that time, without the internal argument. And I noticed I checked the back door, which we never lock. We've never locked it. And I locked it, and then I stood in the kitchen, feeling my own heart going, and I thought, okay, this is me being alone in a house I'm not used to. That's all this is. I'm 34, and I've lived in a city for 15 years, and I'm not used to the quiet, and I'm inventing a reason for the quiet to be threatening. Because a threat you can name is easier than just being alone. I actually think that's a healthy thought, and I still think it's partly true. And then around 9, the motion light on the back of the house came on. The back light is separate from the pole light. It's a motion one over the back step, and it's sensitive. Moths set it off, so I didn't move at first. I sat and waited for it to time out. It's on a 2-minute timer. It did not time out. It stayed on, which means something in its range kept moving, kept resetting it, for, I don't know exactly. I didn't have the presence of mind to time it, but it was long. Long enough that I got up. Long enough that I stopped telling myself moth. I went to the back door, the one I'd locked, and I did the thing where you put your ear near it. And I want to describe this accurately because it's the part I'm least sure of and the part that stayed with me the most. I didn't hear footsteps. I heard breathing, or I heard something that the part of my brain that's built to hear breathing decided was breathing. Slow and low and close, like right at the level of the door handle, low down, which is wrong for a person. A person breathes higher up. I remember thinking that even in the moment, that's too low, and not being comforted by it at all, being more scared by it, because too low for a person doesn't lead anywhere good. It just leads to a different question. I didn't open the door. I want to say I did something brave or smart. I just backed away from it into the middle of the kitchen and stood there, and the motion light stayed on. And then, and this is the last concrete thing, it went off, just timed out normally, click, dark. Whatever it was had stopped moving, which was somehow the worst version, because moving away would have reset it as it left. It didn't leave. It stopped. I called my brother. It was late, but I called him, and I didn't really know what to say, so I said, "Something's outside the house," and there was this pause, and he said, in a totally flat voice, "Is it foggy?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What did you see?" "Is it foggy?" And I said, yeah. And he said, then don't open the door. Don't go out. Don't stand at the windows. Go sit in the middle of the house and wait for it to lift. It always lifts by morning. And I said, what is it, Danny? What is it? And he was quiet. And then he said, I don't know. Nobody knows. That's the whole point. Just don't give it away to know you're paying attention. And he wouldn't say anything else. He said he'd come by in the morning and he hung up. I sat in the hallway. It's the one part of the house with no windows. I sat on the floor in the hall with my back against the wall between the 2 bedroom doors, and I stayed there until it got light, and I'm not going to pretend I was calm. I had my phone in my hand the whole time, with the emergency screen open, and I don't even have real service out there. 1 bar. I heard the house do its normal night sounds, the heating tick, the fridge, and a few times I heard the gravel, not close, up by the road, that light picking sound, moving along the drive, slow, back and forth, more than deer would, and each time I made myself not get up. In the morning it was clear. Danny came at 7 with coffee, and he walked the whole property before he even came inside. I watched him do it. He walked the drive and the back and the tree line, and when he came in, he said, "You're fine." And I said, "What were you looking for?" And he said, "Nothing. Footprints, I don't know." And I said, "Were there?" And he said, "No." And that was almost worse. 2 people had walked that drive in the night. I'd heard it, and there was nothing. The gravel doesn't hold a print great, but the flower bed does, and there was nothing. I asked my mother about it directly that afternoon, and this is the only time she really talked about it. She said when she was a girl, a man named Aldous Peterson, the Peterson place, that's the family, went out in a low fog to bring in a dog and didn't come back, and they found him 3 days later out past the co-op, sitting up against a fence post. No marks on him, just dead of nothing. Of exposure, they said, except it hadn't been cold enough for exposure, and he'd been a mile from a house in a direction there was no reason to go. And she said after that, people just started staying in. She said it like it was reasonable. She said, you don't have to know what a thing is to know to stay away from it. And then she said, the part I can't get out of my head. She said, it doesn't come every fog, and it doesn't come for everyone. But it came up your drive twice now, and I've lived in this house 60 years, and it's never come up the drive. So, and she went back to her crossword. I stayed until my mother recovered enough to drive herself, and then I left. That's the honest ending. I didn't solve it. I didn't set up cameras. I thought about it and I didn't, and I've asked myself why, and I think the truth is, I didn't want to see. There's a version of that footage that I'd rather not have. I don't know what it was. I've had a lot of time to build the reasonable version, and I can build most of it. Fog is disorienting. Sound carries strangely in it. The motion light was probably an animal. Breathing at the door was probably my own pulse in my ears. The gravel was deer. The man from the 1950s got lost and died the way people did before we understood hypothermia. I can assemble all of that, and on a bright day it holds together. But the fog came from the wrong direction. I keep coming back to that. Everything else I can talk myself out of. But I watched it come up an empty road from the empty side against no wind, and it moved like it knew where the road went. And I think that's really what my brother meant. Not, don't let it in. Don't let it see that you noticed it. Because the second time, when I locked the back door and closed the curtains, I did notice it. And that's the night it stopped at my step instead of passing. I don't live there anymore. My mother still does, and she's fine. She keeps the curtains shut, and she doesn't go out in it, and she's fine. But she called me last week, just to talk, And near the end she said the weather's been strange, lot of low fog for June, and there was a little pause, and she said, it came up the drive again. And I asked, was she okay? And she said, I'm not the one it's interested in. And I've been trying to figure out what to do with that ever since. From 400 miles away, where it's never foggy, where I still close my curtains at night without deciding to.